Good morning, viewers, and thank you for tuning in for our first presentation here for SecRef at the Dutch Institute of Study of Crime and Law Enforcement. My name is Raoul Noté, and today I'm going to present to you a research I did with two colleagues of mine from here, Marijke Malsch and Rutger Lunkeveld. And it was a research that was issued by the WODC, which is a research department as part of the Dutch Ministry of Justice and Safety. And the research is going to be about victims of online crime, and specifically on the impact of online crime on their lives, and the needs that come out from this impact, and how they see what the responsibilities should be in organizations as police and victim support to help them with these needs. So a short introduction to the research. As we all know, there's a rise in online crime, and for this research we saw online crime as broad as possible. So we not only looked at cybercrime, pure cyber dependent crime like hacking, DDoS attacks, but we also looked at cyber-enabled crime, or traditional crime that nowadays uses online methods to spread in a more effective and broad way. So then we were talking about fraud cases, so cases where the crime was purely aimed at gaining money, but also interpersonal crime. So then we were talking about stalking, threatening, etc. And the last of the four clusters of crime we researched were sex crimes. And examples we had here were revenge porn, but also escalated sexting. What was the main reason that the WODC issued us this research is that there is little to no knowledge about the impact that online crime has on the life of victims. Why is this important? Because in order to help the victims, policy has been implemented by the Dutch government to support and help victims recover victimization. And this policy has been formulated based on researches like this, but these researches were done on traditional offline crime. And it's also been done based on experiences with traditional offline crime. So the logical question they asked us is, can you do research for us? Can you see into the needs and impact and the consequences for victims of online crime to see if we maybe should make some amendments in the existing policies to support victims? Well, of course we said yes, and we formulated the following research design. We used a couple of different research methods. At first, we did a study of policy documents to see how the victim policy is formulated at this point in the Dutch society. And also we looked across the borders to different countries to see if they made any adjustments to their victim policy specific for the victims of online crime. And for this we aimed on the UK, the United States, Estonia and Germany, because in our network we had the indication that these countries might be a bit further in certain sections of online crime handling than we are. But in order to make sure, we also send out a request via the European Commission to all the member states of the European Union, and specifically asked, did you make any amendments in your victim policy in order to serve victims of online crime better? Next, what we did is we did a literature study to see in all the empirical studies that have been done about the consequences and needs of victims of traditional offline crime. With the results of this, we set up a topic list, and with the topic list we started the main ingredient, as I can say, of our research, and these were interviews with 19 victims of online crime, which were spread out all of over all the four different clusters of crime that I stated before. And next to that we also interviewed 22 experts to see what their experience and opinions are on this point. And the experts we interviewed were police officers who were working in specific Dutch cybercrime units. We interviewed people working for the public attorney office and specifically working on cases of online crime. And we worked with people who work for Dutch victim support organizations and also specifically handle these cases of online crime. So we got like a broad spectrum from victims themselves and also the people who help these victims on a daily basis. To round it up, we wrote down and made an analysis of all this data and information, and we organized an expert meeting here at NSCR, where we gathered experts together, scholars, but also people from police and victim support organizations. We presented them the information we gathered out of the interviews and the literature study, and discussed with them the results. And based on that expert meeting, we also got some very interesting feedback and comments, which we also present in this research. So first, the policy analysis. The Dutch victim support policy is based on EU standard, EU minimum directive on the standard rights of victims. And that's implemented in Dutch society, in the Dutch law. Wetimplementatierichtlijn minimumnorm van slachtoffers en recht doen aan slachtoffers, which are basically Dutch translations of the European English name. What these directives state is that there should be a change in how law enforcement handles the victims, and that they should put the victim more central in the criminal proceedings, where the victim was in the past more or less a point of information that law enforcement can get in order to catch a criminal. The victim should now be put more central in the criminal proceedings, what means that there should be recognition for them as a person, as a victim, to what happened with them. They have rights in order of justice, they should be protected, they should be supported, and they should be able to file for compensation or get a compensation for the additional damage that a victimization has caused to them. As I told you earlier, we asked the European Commission to send out a message to all their member states with a specific question: did you make any amendments to victims of online crime in your policy? We got no reaction from any member state that stated that they did. Out of 22, we got response of 13 member states. So our first indication would be that, just as in Nederland, there not have been any amendments in victim support policy to help victims of online crime. So that means that this research is something that needs to be done. For the literature review, we looked upon empirical studies that have been done about the consequences that crime have on victims and the needs that they express. And we quickly came to a study done by Ten Boom and Kuipers in 2008 that actually did the same literature review that we wanted to do. So we used that as a basis. In Ten Boom and Kuipers, they indicate all the studies that have been done until 2008, I'm sorry. And first finding that they state in this meta-analysis was that the needs that victims express are very strongly correlated to the consequences of the crime. The needs that follow out of this, they cluster in 6 different needs. You can have emotional needs, needs into the criminal proceedings, informational needs, practical needs, which is like can be like help in filing a report or like really practical stuff. Financial needs, like compensation or getting back your stuff that has been stolen. And primary needs. And primary needs should be seen as like help with your immediate safety, help with clothing, help with food, help with shelter. We updated this study and looked into all the empirical studies into victim needs that have been published after 2008, and we didn't find any new needs. That doesn't mean that nothing interesting has been published, but all the needs that were expressed could easily fit into the 6 clusters that we already had. So with this knowledge on our side, we set up a topic list and interviewed the victims, 19 victims, and the 22 experts. And now I'm first gonna go through all the clusters with you and tell you which consequences the victims expressed to us. Well, out of the 19 victims, most of them indicated that victimization had financial consequences for them. The absolute damage or the financial loss that they have varies bigly. Some state it was a couple of hundred of euros. Others indicate that they lost over more than 200,000 euro. What you see in these cases was that the cases with the big financial loss were maybe logically in the fraud cluster. So those were criminals that were specifically aiming at gaining money. The cases in which a lot of money were lost were specifically in long-term fraud. In our research, we saw in this that it was mainly what we call dating fraud, or what you could call romance scams, in which the criminal makes the victim believe that he is indeed a romance or a possible man or husband he finds online, and leads into a scam, and that leads into a 419 scam in order to get money from the victim. So big financial loss. As you can see in one of the quotes that one of the victims expressed, he says, "I don't have anything left. I've transferred my last cents. In a couple of weeks, you lose everything that you've built up for years." Big risk in these long-term frauds is that people really believe in the lie, so they don't tend to believe that they're in a scam, so they won't stop paying until they lost every last penny. Also, victims express that they felt pot committed, so maybe halfway spending all their money, they had the feeling, maybe this can be a scam, but they also know if I stop paying money now, I will never get the rest of my money back. So they feel like captured in the situation. In the other clusters, interpersonal, sexual crimes, and the pure cybercrime crimes, we also saw financial damage, but it was more indirect, like the cost of loss of time or replacement of networks of computers were seen in like pure cybercrime cases, where a computer is been hacked or ransomware has infected it and they need to replace it, or they spend time in order to make things right again. In other cases, like in interpersonal crime, but also in sex crimes, we see that people, because of victimization, lose their job or aren't able to find a new job because of the stigma that attacks to them as a person, which means that they cannot make any money anymore. So that leads to indirect financial damage. In the threat and interpersonal fraud, interpersonal cluster, we see that people get extorted, what costs them money. And we also see that people, because of mental, physical problems caused by victimization, have problems at work or at school. In one case, a victim had to retake an entire year because she wasn't able to keep her head with schoolwork, so that costs her also some extra money. If you look at psychological and emotional consequences, you see that almost all victims express these consequences, 18 out of 19. And what we saw was that the impact of these was often high, in 6 times, so it's 1 in 3. These victims spoke about depression, post-traumatic stress syndrome, and even some suicidal tendencies. So it's very severe, high emotional impact. And what you see in this was that this was mainly in 2 clusters. First in the fraud cluster, in the dating frauds, where I talked about earlier. And this was caused in what Cassandra Cross, whom my colleague Rutger Leukveld already mentioned, has called double or triple hit in earlier research. So what you see in this dating frauds is that people are hit over and over again. So not only they lose a high amount of money because they transfer it to the criminal, they also lose a loved one. The loved one isn't real, but they believe in their emotion they had a loved one and they lose it. So they express grief. Next to that, they experience a strong feeling of shame and social disapproval because their environment states, how can you be so stupid that you did that? Also, they often lose money that they lent from somebody else or money that belonged to somebody else. So the shame also connects to a feeling of anger from their environment. One of the victims stated in a metaphor that she had never been raped physically, but in experiencing being the victim of one of these dating frauds, she did feel that she had been raped. Another form of victimization where you see a very severe emotional impact are escalated sexting or revenge porn. Which means that sexual images of yourself are being put online and visible to everybody who wants to see that, who likes that. It often gets shared a lot and gets a lot of views quickly. and leads to major social disapproval in the environment. And it's not only friends, family, but it's also school, work, or the organizations like police and victim support that's supposed to help you. So one of the victims said about her experience with this, she says, you literally destroy a life with it. She says she knows girls want to end their lives, and there were some cases in which girls or boys did end their lives. And the victim said, I understand it, you just want it to be over. And with it she means the life and the hurting that she feels. Other psychological and emotional consequences, one of the main ones was loss of trust or confidence. 14 out of 19 stated that. And this loss of trust and confidence goes on 3 different levels. The first one you see here in the quote is that people experience that it's hard to trust people. So when somebody talks to them, they think there's a big chance it's not true. Another level is that they don't trust the world in general anymore. So they have a feeling of distrust in general to everything that happens to them. The third most severe loss of trust is that people state that they lose trust that anything good actually is going to happen to them in the future. They lose the trust that something good will happen to them, which of course indicates that that will affect the ways they look at their lives, the way they make plans, the way they look at the future. Because if there's not going to happen anything good in the future, why would you make plans in order to reach certain stuff? Next, victims, 11 out of 19, express strong feelings of guilt and shame. One of the victims screamed at me, I feel so embarrassed, I could have been so stupid. And that's because with all the different cases we saw, there's a strong feeling of it's your own fault when you become a victim. And it's not only being expressed by the environment on the victim, but victims also internalize that feeling. So they really feel into, like right in their heart and bones, they feel ashamed that they have become a victim, and they express that they are stupid that they have become a victim. In line of that, they feel anger, but they also, because they also became a victim, it happened to them. So they feel anger not only towards themselves, but also of course, they feel anger towards the offender, but also towards the organizations. And we will talk about this later, but they feel anger and frustration because most of the organizations like police, victim support, can't really do something to help them, so they feel alone, angry and frustrated. This leads to feelings of anxiety for 7 persons, powerlessness, you can't do anything, and insecurity. And this insecurity comes from a feeling of being afraid of retribution or some more aggression to them as a person, and can also lead to certain feelings of paranoia, because in a lot of cases there has not been any criminal caught. So while criminal is not being caught, you're not sure who the criminal is because it was online. Victims express a feeling of paranoia in which they think that everybody they see on the street could be the possible offender or culprit. Or in cases of sexual cases, they have the feeling that everybody they see on the street knows who he or she is and is looking at you. So that's a pretty intense feeling that develops. And in line with this also, a couple of victims expressed a feeling of strong sadness and grief. As the victim here stated, victim of dating fraud, it was the sadness and grief for her was so severe that she had to go on sick leave, she couldn't work again, and she said even the grieving process after the dating fraud was felt for her stronger and bigger than the grieving she had when she lost her husband before she became a widow. Then we found some different consequences that we clustered on the miscellaneous consequences. And first one of them is something you see especially in cases of identity fraud. And that's the consequence that victims need to prove that they are not the offender, but that they are the victim. Because in identity fraud, their identity is being used, so all the leads lead to the victim that they are in fact the one who did this. So one of the victims said, even after all was said and done, after years, she stated, still I live with the fear that if something bad will happen, will happen in the future from this, or will come to the daylight again, I will have to explain again that I was not the person who did this. In line with what I said earlier about feeling of guilt and shame, victims over all clusters indicate that they feel a strong amount of victim blaming. So they are themselves being held accountable for the fact that they have become a victim. In sex cases, they were stupid to send material. In fraud cases, they were stupid to send money. In pure cybercrime cases, they were stupid that their security levels weren't high enough. In interpersonal level, vice versa. And what I said, this victim blaming is not only about the social environment in friends, family, school, but it's also in organizations. And these are the organizations that should help these victims. As the quote here says, so is a victim of fraud who went to the police and she said, "It's so stupid that you did that." That's what the lady behind the counter, the police officer, said to her. "I have been so stupid. How could I have done that?" That's what's being said to her. So what you see here is that she's like really being held accountable for the fact that she was a victim, and they didn't even speak about the offender. Also, a different consequence that really applies to online crime is that victimization doesn't stop in time. This quote states that clearly. It's a victim of a sex crime, and she says, "I will always remain that girl. I spoke her 5 years afterwards, but still her pictures were online." And she told me that she went to a bar in the city a couple of weeks before I spoke with her, and she said, "Even now people come to me and say, haha, I still got that picture of you." So there is no stopping in time in these cases of your victimization, because it can raise up on the internet, it will stay there and it will come back to you sooner or later, or there's a possibility that it will. In line with this, there's a strong massality and visibility of your victimization, because a lot of the crimes, especially the sex crimes, are being shared online. Your victimization is visible for an audience of maybe millions of people. That's the difference in offline crime, where you go on the street and something happens to you. You can choose who you want to know about your victimization. It's the people who you tell about. In these cases, it's online. You don't have any control about it. And if it gets shared, everybody who wants to can know your story and that you're a victim. Also, the last consequence is the limitlessness of victimization. We also dub this the intertwining of online and offline. But it's because if you're an online victim, you cannot close that door to the online world for yourself to enter your safe zone. You are always in touch with internet and online, so victims have the feeling that they can always be approached by an offender. This girl said, "I had the feeling that I wasn't safe in my own trusted environment, not even in my own bed." She said, "Every day I wake up," she was nervous to look at her telephone because maybe there could be a message from her ex who was stalking her via a new account, via whatever. Even though she had a restraining order against him, but that's an offline thing, a restraining order, because via internet he could always reach her. As stated in the literature study, these consequences lead to needs expressed by victims. And we asked them about the needs based on the 6 different clusters of needs that we found in the literature review, and we asked them to the respondents. But first we asked them, what were the most important needs that you had after becoming a victim? And what they said the most, 10 out of 19, was making the victimization stop. That's really important. And that goes in different cases. It can go, of course, in sex cases, it's like getting videos and images offline. In pure cybercrime or ransomware cases, it's like decrypting files or repairing your network or your computers. But in fraud cases, it was also very important, which surprised me a bit, was like that the victims need to be convinced that they are a victim in order to stop. Because, of course, they're living in a lie that they want to believe in. So you really need to convince them, no, you're a victim, this is a fraud, and you need to stop paying money. That's also what one of the scholars we interviewed said the biggest challenge is to convince them that it's real, that it's really a fraud, and that they should stop it. Another need they expressed as most important was preventing victimization of others. And this is in line with the fact that they experienced that the police couldn't help them after victimization. So they expressed a strong need to go online, to go on Facebook, as this victim said, post, warn others like yourself about these things that are happening online, and hoping to at least have something positive come out of this victimization so that they can help other people to not become a victim. Lastly, named most important need is recognition. Recognition as a person, being treated as a person instead of as a case, and also being recognized as a victim and not as a stupid person or somebody that caused it by him or herself. So this girl said, I just wish that the police would do something, that they would listen to me at the police office. So she really wanted recognition of what had happened to her. If you look at emotional needs, almost all the victims, 15 out of 19, expressed these emotional needs. And what I said, most important there was recognition as a person and recognition what has happened to them. So in addition to the interviews we held, we also had a questionnaire where we asked experts and victims to indicate how strongly these needs are after victimization. And that are what these marks indicate, where a score of 1 was absolutely not important, the need, and a score of 5 was most important. So here you can see that the V, what stands for victims, and the experts even higher, indicate that recognition is a very strongly felt need by victims. Also, in addition to that, they experience, they say that it's very important that the first reception by the police, the first care, first support, also that it's quick, that it's a very strong need. Sadly, for 10 out of 15 of these victims, these emotional needs have not been met in their contact with police or other organizations. And this was in particular their need of recognition, their need of being able to tell their story, to share their story. So this guy said, people are just really not been taken seriously. I couldn't even file a report. And that's something that we sadly see in more cases, that people are not being allowed or being discouraged to file a report at the police. If you look at the course of criminal proceedings, 16 out of 19 victims expressed needs in this cluster. The one that was indicated at most strongly was information on the process and the progress of the criminal proceedings. People want to be updated about what the police is doing or what they are not doing, and what they can expect. Also, the first reaction by the police, what I said, that they wanted to be quickly and that they will be helped quickly, is a need they expressed strongly. 7 out of these 16 victims indicate that they are unsatisfied with the information they got out of the police. And only in 2 out of 19 cases this needs have been met. And this is good illustrated both points by the quote where a person says, if they caught the criminal, no, at least I have no idea if they did, because I didn't hear anything. So if you look at the needs for information, you see that also 2 out of 19 victims express needs in this case. Especially need about information about the offender, about the crime, because it's offline, it's often very abstract. People don't know exactly what has happened to them. So they want to know what happened, who could be the offender, what's happening in my life. And also, and this is in line with the last point, they want to know what will happen with this case after I file a report. What are you going to do with it? What are the possibilities or what are the impossibilities? So they want a certain form of expectation management. We asked the question, do victims receive enough information from the police about the progress of their case? And you see by the score by the victims that they indicate a 1.8 and experts of a 2.4 on a scale to 5, so that's way below par for both. And that's also been illustrated in the quote there, where the victim says, I have not been kept informed about the progress of my case after I reported it. They only receive a confirmation that they filed a report, and afterwards they don't hear anything anymore. Last cluster of needs I want to talk about is financial needs. 10 out of 9 victims express financial needs. And especially what they want is they want compensation, or they want help in getting compensation. They want their lost money back, or they want their lost products back. Only 2 out of the cases really got their financial needs or their financial compensation needs met. And that's because in only 2 cases an offender had been caught. And as the quote says, that in the Dutch system, compensation is only possible if there is a conviction. In most of the cases, there is no conviction, there's not even an offender, there's not even a research. So that leads to the victims who have no way to file a request for financial compensation anyway. In conclusion, if you look at all these consequences and needs that follow from that, and if you compare that to traditional offline crime, we see, looking at online crime, that the impact can be very severe. Not only financial, we've seen cases with damage of more than 200,000 euros, but also emotional, where we're talking about depression, post-traumatic stress syndrome, and even suicidal tendencies. Those needs that victims express are in large similar to the needs of victims of traditional crimes, in a way that they express the needs in the same clusters. What we do see are some differences in consequences that are mainly caused by the fact that it's online crime, and those are the scale of victimization. So in time, it will never stop, but also in the methodology or the audience of victimization. The entire world it's possible that they can see your victimization. Also, what we talked about, the intertwining of online and offline crime. So something that starts offline can go online and vice versa. Also, what we see is a strong sense of victim blaming over all the clusters. This is not something that is new, because we also see victim blaming in traditional offline crime. What is new, what I believe, is that we see it so broadly and that we see it in all the clusters. That's what I said, it happened in pure cybercrime cluster, but also in fraud cluster, in sex cluster, of course, there you would expect it, but also in the interpersonal cluster. So if you look at the research question that we posed, should there be an amendment to the victim policy? No, not really, because the needs that victims express, they match with the traditional offline needs, and those are the same needs that have been expressed in the rights in the directive by the EU and also by the Dutch government. Only problem is that the satisfaction of these needs in online crime are a problem, and the knowledge and the effectiveness of not only the police but also victim support and public attorney needs attention in order to being able to meet all these needs that victims express after victimization. So thank you for your attention. The full report is available online. It's only in Dutch, but it has a very extensive English summary also, so you can check it on this link. You can also send me an email if you have any questions or comments, remarks. I would really like that. And now I'll give the attention to my next colleague who's going to give you a presentation.